Hi, I'm Karan.
Hi, I'm Divya. Thinking,
Thinking. And this is
thinking
On Thinking.
Welcome to the 32nd episode of Thinking on Thinking. Today we talk to the amazingly creative and multidimensional computational mama. We talk about her work in coding, how she made the shift from design to development, all the things that she has learned, how she got into teaching, and a bunch of other interesting things, including how cool her mother is. We hope you enjoy this episode. Why do you like being called computational mama? Like, you're not a gamer, you're not a hacker,
I don't know. It just
you've chosen like a moniker for yourself.
stuck. Like when I started, it was like a secret-ish Instagram because I didn't want to put this stuff in my main Instagram. Which incidentally now I don't even have a login. I don't even remember the password of. So what happened was that I was like, okay, let's do a funny name, and it stuck. And then eventually, what was interesting and has even something I spoke about to another friend in the morning is that. So I slogged my butt off for like so many years in the museum and that like culture sector management kind of roles and design roles. And I have like really no recognition for it except maybe my name might be on one wall somewhere in that museum. But it just gave me a sense that if like I'm getting recognition with this name and it's not like my personality is changing with the name. I'm still just me. But I just felt I should embrace it as much as I want to. And it like allows like I can make more space for myself, the moniker, which in itself is so big, than with my name. I feel like that's where it's at basically.
That's so interesting. Have you heard of this thing called secret identity effect or superhero identity effect, whatever it's called?
No, it sounds like me. Sounds like you're applying it to me.
No, I was recently listening to this person was talking about how this person was a YouTuber and they were talking about how they find it really challenging to be social. But they like made this personality and identity for themselves. And like that is the person that you see on screen. And like that person is outgoing and talkative and like keeps people engaged in his life of the party. But the real quote unquote version of them is totally not. In their mind, they are two different people. Do you feel like you are two different people?
No. It's not like Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. It's very. It's still me, but I feel like maybe I just give myself a bit more space with this moniker, like to be myself, to sort of say what I want to and say, like, if I'm saying something meaningful, it's somehow, I just find that the impact is also a bit more when it's coming from this, I don't know, it's just maybe a mental thing, but.
Okay. So, for some context, Computational Mama started her life as a designer and she used to do a lot of exhibition design work. And then she shifted into being computational and mama almost together.
So my dad was a tinkerer with computers and like even in those days when you have to hook them up to TVs and stuff like. In fact, I have never seen that one, but that's what they would tell me. And then my mother, because she was a designer, she needed a computer pretty early on, and she had all these like whatever all the software that we use now in their original pre-Adobe formats. So, I mean, it was like when she was not using them, we were just tinkering on it all the time, me and him. So I was always very interested in electronics and particularly in computers. And I think I really didn't understand what was the in unless you like went and did a BTech degree, which I didn't want to do, like vehemently didn't want to do. So anyway, so then it kind of, when I moved into college, of course, there was no coding, nothing of that sort. But I think creative coding stuff was already kind of gaining some momentum, maybe say like 2008-ish when I started looking, maybe a little bit before, but that's when I discovered it. And I was like, oh, hey, this seems to be an interesting space to kind of navigate and look at. But I just couldn't, like the examples were too focused on mathematics, they were too STEM focused. So it would just slip away from us even if we tried. And then Coding Train is this NYU professor who has a YouTube channel, and he started doing lots of these streams, which are also like very, impromptu and very like full of energy and sort of not very stifling in that way. And then I think I was like, okay, this is interesting. I can pick this up. And literally, I was just like, I didn't know what to do because I was supposed to be on bed rest. And like when I say I was a designer or in exhibition, it literally meant we were on site for most of the time. So one couldn't do the running around anymore, which had become so sort of like the key clear focus, especially at that time. Nanditi and I met on that project, and I was like, what do I do? So I started trying this stuff, and then it was looking interesting. I had already been tinkering a bit with like Raspberry Pi and SSH and like, trying to maybe figure out servos, and I burnt a computer because somebody told me, hey, why don't you just dual boot it? And then it just like, it went up in flame, like not flames, but yeah, smoke. And then, so I was like, okay, but this is interesting. Like this like gives you a space to understand machinery as
Burning up your computer is interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's like we give technology this kind of space of perfection, and then when you see something like that happen, and then you open up the computer and you see, oh, just like this one thing I did literally did this. And I was really lucky at that time. I befriended a technologist who was really sort of open to sharing his whatever his knowledge was, and he continues to be very sort of very much like the person I go to if I'm really stuck. So that was useful. So that's how then the name stuck. And then I just had like, maybe like 20-30 of us were following each other who were all doing this kind of, so just before like the pandemic, maybe a year before. And then this one person, Abhinay Koparji, who's like this Algorave kind of, he's the founder of Algorave India, and he's also like creative, gone into tech, kind of like somewhere in the middle, little bit like how we are. And he just like totally convinced me. He's like, Nai, you can totally do this. You can come and perform and do the code on the project. And I'm like, how can I do this? Like, you're asking someone who has no background. He's like, that's the whole idea, that you can come, fail, try, do whatever. So that really gave me a space to see that, okay, this can merge into my existing practices in some ways. But then at some point, it just took over. Like that merge became something else. And it was really nice because museums are like, one design can take you maybe many years to even see in fruition,
Right.
because you're coordinating so many things, there's money, this, that. And then here is this code I wrote, and I hit play, and it's like doing something interesting. And then I hit play again, and the same code is doing something different. Which that whole procedural aspect and that random aspect was very interesting, and like made my day a bit more achievable when like museums are mounting on top of diapers, on top of housework, on top of so many other things, like probably, so I think it was nice to just kind of be in that space and like share these little experiments. And like now it's so much more prolific, so many people are doing it, so everything looks very similar. Maybe at that time it was still a bit fresh for Instagram, so I kept getting like making friendships and kind of like looking at what others are doing. And now I feel like I know, I mean, I'm not a hacker, or like I'm not like one of the many people from the art GenAI community who are like really into it. But definitely, like if they give me a bunch of their GitHub links to read through, I can at least understand what's happening and have an opinion about it. Maybe not a technical opinion, but at least a communication level opinion. Like, hey, you want people to get this, you need to figure this out, kind of thing. So that's been very interesting, and I feel like I've almost learnt a new language. That's nice because like I already know Hindi, English, some Tamil, some Kannada, JavaScript, one of them, like that kind of a thing. So yeah, and I think that it helped me really to move out of Adobe, which for me was a very interesting space to kind of look at. Like, how can one prototype, how can one talk about your design work without using these tools? And again, it's like my dad, he was really into open source stuff, and because he was in the education sector, he like changed all the computers in the school to Linux, and he would keep pushing me, oh, try this, try that. And I would be like, this is not, I don't know if you open these open source softwares that like GIMP and all.
I have.
Oh my god, it's like, how can somebody do their professional work on? It's impossible.
Yeah.
But now, because like say maybe I'm at a space where it's more art direction and less like doing it yourself, it's really simple to just like prototype on P5JS and then tell the development person that, hey, we want something like this, can you do this? So that's been very exciting. So it's like it's still a design tool for me, really.
It's very interesting that you say that like it is a design tool, because so our journeys have almost like mirrored each other. Like you were a design person who went into technology, and I was quote unquote conventionally trained to be in the STEM industries, and then I moved into design. I mean, I left the STEM industries very early on. But like it's very interesting how like regardless of what you end up doing, where you come from and what you learn also like shapes a lot about how you look at the world. And like how you said, like it is a design tool, it's almost like, you know, in your brain there is this base level of design learning that is just ever present, and you're like, okay, now I can just do this faster or better or differently, or like with what it seems like is like slightly lower stakes. Like it's just you can do iterations easily, you can show it to people more easily. um hmm. Okay, so what part of your thinking as like an exhibition designer do you think come into picture, and what part of like, you know, your thinking generally come into picture, especially I don't know, when you talk to like people who have more conventional coding experience and who just, you know, like sort of who studied CS and then stayed in the domain, and like, you know, maybe instead of learning a couple of languages they're just like, you know, just deep into that one specific thing or something like that.
How do I feel different from them is what you're asking? Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel differently? How do you think differently? Like, how do you look at them and are like, why does this not seem like a design variable in this situation to you?
So, because we were running this creative studio, like me and Nanditi, the technologists who've been working with us in the past have been people who are like looking for some kind of like cultural emancipation, shall I say? Or like looking for, I mean, I don't want it to be demeaning, but yes, you know, they are also looking for projects that are more meaningful. And I think it's an easy thing to enter arts kind of a space to get a bit of that. And of course, one or two of them were also like practicing semi as designers. So what was interesting was to kind of like unfold that idea with them that whatever we are producing, at what intersection, like is it art, design and tech, like what are those meeting points, and at what point we have to like bow down to the technology, and at what point we will bow down to the design. And I think that collaborative space was interesting because it wasn't like we were eventually going for that vision, which was a vision of an artist or an arts organization. So then eventually, you obviously make it more design focused. But now that I'm working with GUI and I'm meeting more technologists who are doing like more hardcore technology work, I think it's very interesting because one is like I've never like worked in a product company. I've always worked on projects.
Right.
So one has like this shift of vision, which you can carry very quickly and with a lot of like rigor, but you're still moving from one vision to the other. But with product, you feel like you have to be very focused. So you have to take forward that one thing really slowly and iteratively and like keep going with it. So I feel that's very nice and it's very different for me. Right now, I am allowing them to do what they're doing and just seeing where I fit into all of it. So I really don't, maybe I don't have a like a very strong opinion about how they are practicing. Definitely have many strong opinions of what they think about the rest of the world for sure. I mean, of course, but at least in perspective of what they're doing, like I'm just like interested to see how they achieve it, like you know. And I feel like most of the conversation I see, there's a balance of talking about tech and business, but yes, I feel like a very limited conversation on their end about the user, about design, about like the end person in the end who's working with it. So like I don't know what are those layers between them and that end user, which I think for designers it's always like that's the practice. You start with the user and
Yeah.
and here it's so that is of course something that it's very new for me, but I'm allowing myself to just like absorb it in the moment and just see where it goes. Like so I think many of these, especially this RAG stuff that's been happening, like end user still like currently or just like the developers thinking that his or her end user, their end user is just another developer, you know.
Yeah.
So, but like now where we are in at GUI is we are really looking at the end user. So I'm just figuring like for me it's very new working in like product in this way. So I'm just like letting it go. as it is.
It's also interesting. So, like, when you worked in museums,
Yeah.
would you say that like there were a lot of conversations around like cultural impact of whatever you are creating? Because I would imagine that like a lot of times museums are being built precisely for the cultural impact,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But when you're building in tech, while you're gonna create massive scale and cultural impact, I don't think that a lot of conversations happen around the cultural impact of things.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Do you have qualms about it?
My main thing is like this data bias stuff, which has been like really been a burning question for me. But obviously, I have very like limited resources as an individual to like capture that. And so basically, the museums that I work for across like government funded and privately funded,
Hmm.
and from 100,000 square feet size exhibition space to I've done even 1,200 square feet. So just like a small house.
Oh wow.
So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like big to small. I've done many types.
Hmm.
And I think all of them start with this basic thing where they say that everybody should have access to it,
Hmm.
that everyone should have access to the story that we are telling. So, and usually, in my case at least, I have only worked on like more narrative driven museums
Hmm.
than just like museums with objects inside of them.
Hmm.
So think Indian music experience versus
Like a history museum or something like that.
like maybe just a museum with objects in it, just like a
Yeah.
government simple archaeological museum. So I've done more of the narrative ones. So then it's really about telling stories. It's telling stories in a way that's accessible. So there's a huge trickle down. Like, so imagine like these experts who have worked for years and they're PhDs in their subjects and they want to tell everything about whatever they know.
Yeah.
But then, there's one person who wants to come and just do it for like 5 minutes or like maybe has 40 minutes to spend before they go to their next commitment.
Hmm.
So there was one designer who really like affected the way I'm looking at it. And I think we have passed that practice on to even our digital projects. And in fact, now in GUI also, I've been talking about this, is that there are two main kinds of visitors. You'll get a racer and a grazer.
Okay.
So a racer will just like race through your museum
Hmm.
and they want to get everything in like that 40 minutes time that they have before they go away. And then there's a grazer who's like like a grazing in the field. So they'll go through every single piece. They'll like really be there for 2-3 hours and absorb everything.
Hmm.
They'll come out. They both will come out enriched.
Hmm.
It's not that I'm saying that the racers don't value the experience, but they look at it in a different way. It's like how, some people surf the web really fast and some kind of really go through each page.
Hmm.
So that allowed us to really like look at layering of information.
Hmm.
And I think with the web, it's so much more important.
Hmm.
Yeah, so basically, this impact, of course, is very large. And I think, particularly with Indian museums, you have this thing, ki, oh, no, everybody around has to have. So then there are those layers, ki, the people who are like right at your community level to the foreign tourist who's coming into the museum, and
Hmm.
how do we kind of include all of them?
Hmm.
Of course, politically also, there's a lot of accessibility around language that's very important. So at least one extra vernacular language is needed.
Hmm.
And how those translations work, what level we want it to work in, all of that.
Hmm.
So that's something I've also been thinking about. Like when you're looking at the museum, you're thinking accessibility to all, which basically means a diverse set of people coming into your museum from
Correct.
diverse backgrounds.
Hmm.
But that's something that I find that gets totally missed out when we think about scaling projects on the web.
Hmm.
Like look at the biggest scaled project right now, say maybe Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah.
It's really thriving on diversity. And we just totally forget about that because we are so like pigeonholed within that, right? So
Hmm.
of course they know how to like keep their silos in place, but everybody's still using their projects.
Hmm.
And so that means that when you're scaling, you have to look at diversity. You can't just think ki next billion means it's like one category of demographic that's like in a tier 2 city of a particular age.
Yeah.
They are across, that it's porous, like in that sense.
Hmm.
So that's something I'm finding really missing in the language.
Hmm.
And I feel like if that kind of becomes much more mainstream, like really effectively looking at diversity, it will affect all aspects, like the data bias aspect as well. Because immediately you are like looking at diversity in a particular way, which means you're looking at your research in a particular way, which is then kind of has this like more formidable effect on the technologists who obviously don't have the bandwidth to think about all of this, but keep it as a key part of their project when they're starting off. Like what would that mean if that went reverse? Like
That is very interesting. I think that you have a much more hopeful view of this than I do. I think coming from an engineering college with like 90% guys and they all think the same, feel the same. Okay, I'm being very like non-generous here, but I think there is this temptation to almost think that like everybody has the same life experiences as I do.
Absolutely.
Like I've had so many conversations with guys who were in my college, and when the Me Too movement happened, and after that, like I've had some conversations with guy friends who were like, oh, is this real, did this happen to you also? And they're like they're being very kind, they're being very sweet, and it's very, very nice, but at the same time it's like, yes. And then in reality it's like, even there 10% of the population went through this, right? Like
Yeah.
even like 10% is not insignificant.
Yeah.
Like in a college of 5,000 people, that's like 500 folks. 500 folks went through that. That's a very large number.
Yeah.
But there is this, like, I don't know, homogeneity breeds like intolerance in a particular sense.
For sure.
And I think that like that has become almost the backbone of tech.
For sure.
There's like a particular kind of person who ends up being in tech and who ends up rising through the ranks in tech. And it's very, I don't know, it's very hidden and it's under the layers, but at the same time, it's also very visible if you try to see it.
So visible, like it's so, I mean, like just look at the surnames. As an Indian, just look at the surnames and you immediately know what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate, but it's the truth. And I think that that's a problem that if these guys are not able to make space for us, we just have to make it for ourselves. And I think you and me, we are kind of doing that. I can see that.
Yeah. So, like slightly switching tracks.
Sure.
Did you used to teach people before you became a creative coder? Like, were you interested in like teaching? Also, like for context, she and her co-founder Nanditi have been running these like really amazing code drift workshops where they get people to do music, but plus coding, plus like some cool visual stuff. Like she can talk more about it, but that's the context.
Yeah, I never, maybe I just took like maybe one or two design kind of modules. But Agat, my partner has always been in design education. So I hear about it a lot. My mother has always been in. And my dad, of course, he was part of a school admin. So like, I understand the modalities of it at different like layers and at different levels. But I don't know. I really didn't think I had anything to teach in design. But here I really found a space because I was like, there are these creative people who are interested in learning technology, and there's like very limited kind of formats for that to reach them. And now that they are seeing me do it, they were asking me, they were like, hey, can you teach us? So like my observation was very like, it was all women who were asking me.
Interesting.
So that's how the first session started actually. So it was like Anisha, Thampi, this young person, Maylin, whose mother, who are all designers in that house as well. And then of course Nanditi was like, okay, just join. I was like, just join because there are more people. And it was all women and they were all designers. So then I was like, okay, that means that there is something missing in the communication out there in the world that's not allowing them to access technology in this way. Something is missing. And they're interested. So what would that mean? And that's really how I started teaching them. And I literally learned, like I would learn the concept a little bit better just before the class, because then I was like, okay, I have to teach it. One is to just know it, but then the other thing is to teach it. Those are two very different things. Sometimes it like makes so much sense obviously to us, but when you're teaching it, it really changes. And I think that was really helpful because it made me a much more confident coder, because I'm like, okay, now I know these basic things very well. And I'm actually really good at debugging stuff now, sometimes better than the chat GPT. But I mean, in the very like, at least in the classrooms set, where people are like, hey, this is not working. And I'm like, okay, that's because you've forgotten this thing here, or this logic is wrong. So that was very interesting. And I thought it was a very surprising move for myself. I did not think of myself as someone who could be an educator in a more consistent way.
Do you think it had something to do with the birth of your son and like almost taking on that role of like teaching this human how to navigate life?
No, he was too small then, like he was really tiny when all of this started. So
Okay.
at that point, I didn't feel like, like that learning is so basic, like just standing up or like potty training. So like I don't feel so much like I was teaching him anything. Like, it's more like he was observing, and it's more like a facilitation of sorts. I don't know.
Hmm.
In fact, even for I was talking to Divas, he's a curator, and he helped me write like an essay
Hmm.
about all of this work. And I was like looking at the difference between being called a teacher versus being called a facilitator or something.
Hmm.
And I feel like I still cannot resonate with being called a teacher.
Okay, what's the difference?
Like to teach kind of gives me this feeling that it's one way only.
Hmm.
But saying facilitator allows me to feel like I'm just kind of giving them the right kind of tools and practice processes, and then they are figuring it out themselves,
Hmm.
which seems more true to maybe something to do with feeling like teaching is about, like, has that like kind of school classroom kind of notion.
Like a weird power dynamic thing?
Yeah, maybe exactly. Yeah.
Um, it's also very interesting because creativity is something that can be learned but cannot be taught. Like somebody can create like the right setup for you and give you the tools and like answer your questions, but you kind of have to teach yourself how to be creative. Nobody else can teach you how to be creative,
For sure.
because what you're teaching is almost like unlocking a different dimension of people's creativity. Like they are creative in some domain,
Yeah.
and then like how do you extend that to something else?
Yeah, maybe. Like I grew up, like my mom and dad are both designers. My dad never practiced, but some things came to just by like being passed on. Like using a cutter really well, or knowing how to half score a board. So those things
Yeah.
came to you at home, which allowed you to be a little more like hands-on. And I just feel like I had a lot of that nurture than nature kind of thing, at least in my creative practice. And firstly it was like at home, and then I went and studied the same thing.
Hmm.
And then obviously, like, sometimes you are creative in a way which is not so direct. It's the output is not direct. Maybe
Hmm.
like my ways of teaching are creative.
Hmm.
Maybe my curriculum making style is creative, or maybe my art direction is creative. But I really wonder sometimes, if I didn't have this background, if I would have been creative or not. You know, like when I say maybe like some of my cousins who I'm very similar to in nature, I feel like they ended up not being in creative fields.
Hmm.
But sometimes I see people like you, or I see Agat, there is this inherent inside. It's there. So like for me, it's much more practiced. I feel like I know how to think differently, and that really helps me to push my boundaries a lot more. And it's not like an imposter thing. I really feel it. Like I'm creative. I can build you a computer.
Like no, but I understand
Yeah,
it.
like I can build a very nice dinosaur mask for my son with whatever is available at home, no extra material.
Hmm.
I can do that. I can like do really good origami, and
Hmm.
I'm really good with my hands and things. I'm quite okay, but I still feel like I don't think I can bear that title of being creative.
That's so interesting. So, a thing that I've been recently thinking about, which is kind of in the same vein, is I was doing this thing, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, and where she asks you to write 3 morning pages every day. And that has been an interesting exercise, but she also like gives you some prompts sometime, like your childhood memories or something, and that's the week that I'm on right now. And like she asked to write something like, what are your favorite traits as a kid? um, and it was very interesting because I did not write creative, but I was a very very imaginative kid. um, and I think that like as I grew older, like my understanding of it is I was imaginative. I think I was crafty as well, like I was good with my hands. But I think somewhere down the line the productivity thing came in, and that is when imagination became creative, because I like added something to be produced at the end of it. um, and like we have talked about this many times, you've also like mildly scolded me on my like obsessive need to be productive. But I think it's just interesting because like even when you were talking about it, it's almost like you're saying, I think that like I am creative by some definitions, but I don't think I have all of the components that would make me feel comfortable calling myself a creative. While a good coder, you feel like I have all the components that are needed.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of like being able to say that, yes, this is a skill set I can build on,
Hmm.
I find that I can confidently say, yes, it's a skill set I can build on. I understand it. understand how the logics work, etc. I understand when people tell me about it. But with design, I just feel like I used to always find that if someone did something which was brilliant, that I didn't feel like I could ever be there. Like, like I don't feel a natural way to paths to that. But with coding, I can see that. I'm like, okay, if I want to be as amazing as Nirant, what are the things I need to do? Like, I
Interesting.
can chalk them out easily in my brain. So
Despite the fact that you have had like design learning for almost your entire life, with like your mom being a designer, while on the other hand, like
yeah,
the coding stuff is like, it's relatively new, right? Like it's been
yes,
5 years or something
yes,
like that.
yes, yeah. It's very, very new. I mean, I'm not trained formally at all in it. Like, I've not even done a Coursera course. I'm so untrained. But that's how I feel. Like, I even when Nanditi and I do the code riff at the end, we did a performance. I never feel like, oh, like I did a good job. But of course, some aspects like how to get the client's vision out, I'm extremely good at figuring that out, and that requires some creativity. That requires like a lot of like having a knowledge bank of visuals and figuring out, okay, what will work for them. So that stuff I get. So maybe like if one had to think of it like as a problem solving thing, yes, very creative. Yeah, sometimes I do end up making interesting sketches on P5. I have reasonably good skills at sketching. I used to be really good at calligraphy when I was younger. Again, so something is this: there's a book at home. There's a calligraphy pen nobody has used for 5 years. Done. Essay.
Yeah.
Like that. That's how I like finish things. Like origami book finished. We didn't have Instagram when we were younger. So this is how I just like I explored things like this. And khali, like waste paper is there and you're allowed to use it. Imagine 90s mein, where were we allowed to use waste paper? So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was seeing my mom's practice also, which was very interesting. Her practice is very rooted in like working for communication in the field. And that really gave me a sense of what all design can be. Those notional ideas of like universal design, this, that. She came from that background. She was taught in NID. And then she realized that those same things don't work here at all. And that was really, and that's again like this whole diversity aspect that, like as soon as you're talking about scale,
Yeah.
she had this incident where she made a poster, and that time you had to make it by hand, and
Yeah.
she drew this person saying no with their hand like this. And she took it to test in the field, and people thought they are waving. They didn't understand this,
Oh.
or they didn't understand a cross as a no. They understood as two sticks.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so their visual understanding is entirely different. Or if you ask, mom's website is really interesting. So if you ask a rural person who's maybe not gone to school, to draw their body, they draw inside and outside together. And pregnancy is not drawn by showing a big tummy, it's drawn by putting a black dot.
Oh wow.
If you show a big tummy, it means that the person is bloated. They have some kind of other gastric problem, or
Oh
some kind
wow.
of like abdominal abnormality.
Hmm.
So, and then she even found that the blob is differently portrayed across various like regions. But that was it's been very interesting to see that journey of hers, which literally happened like as I was growing up, because she was like building this role for herself. And yeah, my mom is really cool. She's a MacArthur Grant winner also, which is like yeah,
Oh wow.
she's a MacArthur fellow. And like
I wonder if that is also another thing that, like, you have such incredible from childhood examples of designers that
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
okay, that I can't get there.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. It was not just them, but like even in the classroom, like maybe say in the design class, like I would be like, okay, this person is really amazing, and I don't think I can achieve this. But now, and I can still feel like that about so many artists or designers. Even a simple sketch you showed me the other day, I was like, I don't think I can think like that. It was something for your podcast client. Like, I cannot think like this. But then if like like Dave and Nirant will come up with some GitHub link, I'll be like, I have to figure out how they're doing it. Like, and I feel like it's like, okay, maybe if there was no Yugen and I had like 10 more hours to give every day, I would be faster.
You would have.
But also, if he was not there, I may not have been Computational Mama. So it's like,
Very true. Very true.
So it's very funny. Yeah, but yes, like it's interesting. Like in my role at Ajaibghar, I'm still very much in the creative and like design kind of space, because we do have to have a, like someone to do the development.
Hmm.
But if someone on the road asks me what I do, I will never tell them that I'm a designer. I'll say, okay, I will work on websites, or like I'll say maybe I'm a technologist, I work with AI, but I would never specifically say that I'm a designer, which you might, I know. So
That you are a designer, yes, I would.
no, that you might say that you are one.
No, I definitely, I think, feel the most comfortable.
You identify with
Yeah,
that.
I feel
Yeah.
it's becoming lesser and lesser of my identity now, because it's like at this point, if I include product designer, brand designer, and game designer, then that is 50% of what I do. So that I can still say that that's the most, inclusive, I don't know, identity. But I have no idea how I'm going to define myself in a year.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I've just accepted this aspect of my personality
Yes.
where I'm like, you know what? I'm never gonna settle on one
Yeah.
thing. The moment I have a description for myself, I'm gonna be like, bye. Now I'm gonna figure something else out.
I 100% am in that same boat.
Oh no. So then, like, once you fully feel like you have embodied computational mama, then you're gonna be like, now time for something different.
But that's the thing, maybe like competition can be like infinitely growing. So maybe
Yeah.
like maybe it can last a little longer, or maybe like until I become a grandmama or something, or if that's ever in the cards. Anyway. So yeah.
Awesome. This has been a super fun conversation. Do you want people to check out something that you've made, or like, where can they find you, something like that?
So you can see some of the things that we are doing together, including Code Drift, which Divya mentioned, on ajaibghar.co on Instagram. And I am on computational_mama, MAMA, not MUMMA, also on Instagram.
Thank you so much for coming, Computational Mama.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking on Thinking. Our theme music is by Steve Combs, and our audio engineering is done by Akshay from BTRPT Music. We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and if you'd like to know more about our guest, you can refer to the show notes. Thank you.